Hey everybody, welcome to Act 3 on CHLY. CHLY, let me try that again. It's Monday. Oh my gosh, and Monday and my tongue are not working. It is Monday. You are listening to Act 3 on CHLY 101.7 FM. Aren't you glad you tuned in? I sure am glad you did. My guest today is the Provincial Coordinator for Volunteer BC. Her name is Marie Koeppen, and we've got lots to share. Hey, welcome to the program, Anne-Marie. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Just a slight correction. I'm on the board of Volunteer BC.
Oh,
Vice President.
apologies.
Yeah, thank you. So, nonetheless, thank you for having me today, and look forward to our conversation.
Well, thanks for coming. There's so much that we do in community that is on the backbone of volunteers. Tell us more about what your organization does.
Right. So Volunteer BC is the provincial organization for what I like to call all things volunteer. It's basically nonprofits, anything that's volunteer driven in the sector. Of course, we're not exclusive to there's no just, I want to take the word just out, to nonprofits. Any organization, whether it be for-profit, nonprofit, government, healthcare, whatever, anything that involves volunteers or volunteer driven groups, organizations, societies, any such thing. So what we do is we hopefully are able to provide resources. Advocacy is part of our mandate. And it is truly a provincial organization. We have representation from across the province. I'm surrounded by giants in the sector. There's no question about it. And their voice of experience rules supreme, and they're all a humble bunch. And yeah, so we hopefully will be able to do some great things in the future. We look forward to what comes next. Yeah, so that's Volunteer BC. We are a small board, but I feel an effective board. It's a working board. We have a manager that works along with us and guides us well, and she's 3/4 time, and then we have a part-time assistant as well. So that's Volunteer BC.
So you said something that I found quite interesting, in that most organizations think about volunteering as being for nonprofit agencies or service clubs or things like that. But then I'm sure that I just heard you say for-profit agencies as well. What does that look like?
Yeah, so for-profit organizations may have, for an example, they may have employees that volunteer. So they have the employee volunteer programs within their organization. For an example, a bank may run that kind of a program, and very successful. They'll go out into the community and offer their services, be it professional expertise or simply whatever is needed, by volunteer as a volunteer within organizations. For an example, TELUS has a great day of giving that they do once a year, and that's a bigger organization that I can think of. And then again, like the banks, as I mentioned, is a good example, but that's not limited to that. Volunteer Canada has a corporate council that I can speak to very well in terms of the volunteerism that happens in their many organizations. I can think of American Express. They said banking organizations, Royal Bank of Montreal, many, WestJet, Air Canada. Had the opportunity to meet many of these individuals that are in charge of these programs that send people out to volunteer. And it's not volunteer told, it is volunteerism. They wish to do this, so it's not a requirement. And that's the kicker piece there. As far as the government goes, yes, there is volunteerism that occurs in the same way there. They will connect with and provide opportunities with their employees to do something similar. So, and then you have healthcare facilities, yeah, that same, doctors, nurses, those kinds of things will go out and volunteer. Those kinds of individuals go out and volunteer as well. I can go on, but yeah, so it's not just restricted to the nonprofit sector in what we would think of. I like to say anything that's volunteer driven.
Yeah, and it sounds like that there's a lot that I don't think many of us would have naturally considered. When I think about volunteerism from a perspective of the larger organizations, I guess I am sort of reminded by my days in living in the West End of Vancouver when they did the Symphony of Fire, which was, held by a host organization. But then so many of the employees of that host organization would volunteer their time in order to help facilitate the program. So, I just not really ever put the connection in together, but really it's thousands of people we're talking about.
Well, what we're talking about is 13 million Canadians.
Whoa, 13 million Canadians.
And this is a bit of a fast fact here.
I love fast facts. Love them.
A few statistics here. So what I'm going to say is 13 million Canadians, or 44% of people aged 15 and older. And that's a statistical piece of documented information. And 2 billion hours of time. That's pretty impressive, actually. And so what it goes on to say is an average volunteer contributes 154 hours per year, or 3 hours per week. And this equates to 1 million, I love this, 1 million full-time jobs.
So no kidding.
Gross national product, if you will. And something to consider in British Columbia, because of course that's where we live. British Columbians volunteered an average of 180 hours. And this
hours per year, or 180 hours?
Yeah, so that would be per year. Yeah, an average, but because some more, some less, of course.
Sure.
And it translates into 165,000 full-time jobs, or 315 million hours. So that's pretty impressive if you think about it.
My eyes are popping, actually. I know our listeners on the radio cannot see my eyes popping right now, but they're actually really popping. Yeah. Those are huge numbers. And I think, I know in the senior sector, in the older adults population, there are many people that volunteer in families that don't consider themselves as volunteering their time. Right. They don't self-identify as being volunteers when they're looking after someone that they love, but that's also volunteering, isn't it?
So that's the informal volunteering, the undocumented volunteering, which is near and dear to my heart. And I think that it's huge. You can take it down to some pretty basic, volunteering is helping your neighbor shoveling snow, cutting the grass, clearing the leaves, picking up groceries, taking them to the doctor, all of those kind of things that are the informal volunteering. So undocumented, untracked.
And you know what those numbers might look like?
Say that, I'm sorry?
That's okay. Any idea what those numbers might look like, just as a guesstimation?
I can't, I don't have that for you, but it's something that definitely is talked about a lot across Canada, and Volunteer Canada is looking at trying to track that. We talk about it a lot. I'm involved with the Advisory Council for Volunteer Centers, being, of course, the representative for British Columbia for the Volunteer BC. And that is a conversation that we do have. And one that would be interesting to put some time and effort into trying to track. I mean, there's so many projects that I would love to engage in, such as how many volunteers do we really have in British Columbia?
Yeah.
The untracked ones, the organizations, the groups, individuals that volunteer that they don't sign up anywhere. We don't know about them. That would be an interesting bit of information to find out. I think that And in all honesty, being a lifelong volunteer and engaged volunteer, I don't think enough credibility is given to volunteerism as a whole, nationally and provincially. Although volunteers are thanked officially, there's no question about it. They are recognized officially, but considering the hours and the time, I tend to get on a rant when I talk about this. But a colleague of mine once said, she's leading edge, Linda Graff. She's an international speaker, long since retired. She used to say, "What if volunteers went on strike for 1 day, 1 week, or 1 month? What would happen?" I I can't even imagine what would happen. But by nature, volunteers would never even consider the idea because it's not what we do. It's not who we are. It's not, and I see you're nodding your head because because you have volunteered, are volunteering, like myself, and it's just not in our nature to do that. But it certainly gives pause to think. I like to bring that up a lot when I'm speaking with larger groups and individuals, because it's something that's quite real, and you can kind of grab onto it. It's tangible.
Well, and I think that I agree with you. For our listeners that have just tuned in, just so you know, you're listening to Marie Koeppen from Volunteer BC, and you've tuned into Act 3 on CHLY 101.7 FM. I think that that what you said about your mentor, if we stop volunteer, I remember hearing that before. I might have even heard it from you, to be truthful, from other meetings that you and I've shared. But I recognize that at no other time has this really become a fruition in the sense of COVID-19, because we know that even though certainly volunteerism hasn't completely halted, it's definitely changed. The landscape of volunteering just simply doesn't look the same anymore. So can you shed a little bit of light on what does that look like? I mean, there's so much that we can unpack with this, but I'm really curious about that comment that she has so gracefully made and you quoted so eloquently, and the reality of COVID-19 is here.
Yeah. So because I'm in the throes of provincial and national and local, where I live here on Thetis Island, the same thing. Many things that were being done. I just had this conversation with a volunteer this morning, and many things that were being done are not being done. Some things that were being done are being done in a different way. One of my questions, a bit of a sidestep, is who's going to be around in 2021 in the nonprofit and for-profit sector, if you will? Who's going to be around, and what will volunteerism look like? Those are big questions. There's many things that's tied to it. First of all, there's the resources, the human resource, and also the financial resource. Many folks are not interested in continuing to volunteer in any way, shape, or form. They do not want to participate in what they were doing before. Some folks have started volunteering again. I will say, for an example, our local thrift shop, which I love. I love the cause. I love supporting it. Can't say enough about it. And the folks that are volunteering, and it's mainly seniors that are in that shop. And they have implemented measures that accommodate their needs and the needs of the folks that, of course, are shopping at the thrift store. And that's working very, very well. Some organizations that I know of have not reopened again. They're on a permanent pause. Because of the nature of what they do. Driving seniors, that's become a bit of a challenge, but things seem to be working out according to spec on that. this is an important piece, because this enables folks to get to their appointments and you know, groceries and these kind of things. So alternate methods are being done. Groceries are picked up for them and dropped off instead of taking them shopping and those kinds of things. Just trying to think of some other great examples of what has continued. Well, a colleague, Volunteer BC board member, they've had to cease a number of their programs simply because of the what's happening on the mainland and the rise in COVID infection cases and so on and so forth. So it's again stalled. Other, as I said, other organizations are looking to be more creative. How can they continue to deliver their services via Zoom or phone check-ins, those kinds of things? I think we're all getting Zoom to death, but and some folks that are not so technical are starting to learn it, those kinds of things. So really about that connection, remaining connected and sustaining those relationships, because that's what we do. We're in the business of relationships, and so it's difficult. It's difficult in a lot of cases to not, you know, don't forget about people. Don't forget about that connection and how you can maintain that connection. Colleague Rita, who is the executive director for Volunteer Nanaimo, that you know very well, and we talk about this at great length, and the different programs that they have and what they offer and how they offer it. Again, you know, they've had to be quite creative in how they can manage their, you know, how do they have people in the office? Do they have people in the office? What does that look like? All of those kinds of things. So I hope I've answered your question in a roundabout way. I tend to get on, as I said, on a rant, and
I think you answered it quite well. I mean, I think that it's true. I think we have to have a little bit of forward thinking, remaining as positive as we can, but a little bit of forward thinking, understanding, you know, what is 2021 going to look like? We do know that Dr. Bonnie Henry has certainly encouraged us to consider the fact that at least for the next year, things are not going to be business as usual. Not that anything was really ever as usual anyway, or whatever a new normal is. I still haven't quite wrapped my head around that terminology, because what's ever really normal anyway? But having said that, the concept of us finding new alternative ways to communicate and to be with community has really, really offered some wonderful explorations for people to consider, you know, utilizing. You know, even this radio show right now is being taped by Zoom, and I know so many business professionals at this stage of our lives, we're so zoomed out. I mean, it's just, you know, at the time of taping this recording, you know, I've been on Zoom since 8:30 this morning, and many of my colleagues, you know, start at 7 and work to 7, 8, 9, at 10 o'clock at night on Zoom. So we do need to find a new way or a balanced way of working through this. However, volunteerism has never been more important, even though it's different. It's never been more important. And, you know, you mentioned our colleague and good friend, Rita, you know, she's been on the show a number of times, and we've talked about the importance of remaining connected, particularly now with the Christmas Angel program, which is so reliant on volunteers and community advocates, which brings me a little off topic, but back to some of the original topics we were talking about and how it relates to advocacy for these very things, right? How do we deal with, you know, the new, again, I hate using the word, but the new normal in volunteerism as it relates to advocacy and supporting community where they're at, in the moment where they are. I mean, you just spoke of your secondhand shop, your favorite secondhand shop on Thetis. I have to go to Thetis just to check that out, because that's, you know, that's my addiction, is secondhand shops. But, you know, I know that with a smaller island, your volunteer pool is smaller. You know, how does advocacy help, or does it, when your pool is small and you're trying to create, So probably a 12-folded question in the way I presented that, but hopefully you'll be able to make some sense of it and answer it for us.
Totally, absolute sense. So just a slight correction, and it's going to be easier for you to get there. So it's actually in Chemainus. Yes, folks, it's in Chemainus. So you're going to want to head there. And it's got to be one of the nicest secondhand stores I've ever been to in my life. And the volunteers are exceptional.
Offline, you're going to have to send me the info for that then, for sure.
Certainly will. Yeah, wonderful location, and again, shining volunteers. So yeah, so what's it going to look like? What are things going to look like? It's and I'm with you. I don't know, new normal. What's normal? I don't know what that really means, because just by the nature of volunteerism is constantly changing. It's constantly moving and shifting, and so you can't really, I wouldn't, yeah, there's no normal there. I don't think there ever has been. People are engaged from, I always say, youth, family, adults, seniors, and a combination of all. And the needs in each of those areas and sort of across the board, it changes. We're constantly looking at how we can develop something to address a need. And so I always call it fair exchange, fulfilling the need of the client, and the need of the volunteer, yeah, so that each get what they need to get out of what they get. So if that makes sense to you. Yeah, so it's really about that, and again, in this, and you pointed out, these are different times, and so what does that really look like or mean? And in each community, and including here on Thetis, depending on the demographic and what's going on, we need to continue to reach out and address those needs. And what I'm finding, and what I see, and others will say the same, is that, and we'll go back to the informal volunteering, I find that folks are, I don't know, there seems to be somewhat of a calmness that has happened. And because folks are able to stay home and work from home, not always the case, but mostly, folks that I know are able to do that. And so they're finding that they've got a bit of extra time. They're also finding that they're more connected with their neighbors, and finding out who their neighbors are, instead of the, run like the hounds of hell are chasing you. Did I say that?
That's okay. It's community radio. You can say stuff like that.
Try not to, but that pretty much gives you a visual, and it seems like it's always, you're bolting and you're running and you're doing and you're out of breath, and you don't have time to just think about things in a different way. And that's what I really see is the passion for compassion. That's what I see. It's more of that, and kinder nature.
Yeah, so that kind of ties into that, as you pointed out at the beginning of your response. It goes back to that unsung hero mechanism of volunteers that are volunteering, but they're just being human. They're not counting those hours or sharing those numbers for people to be able to, get a broader range of what's really going on. And I witnessed that a lot. I know when Rita was on the last time, I spoke about the ninjas that we've recently seen. There was a number of different ninjas that came around with wine bottles and all of that for, trying to get the community connected. But here, I live in the center of Vancouver Island. As most people know, I'm right in Nanaimo. And, I was watching some ninjas that were coming along and supporting seniors by dropping off gift vouchers, gift bags, special treats, things like that on the neighbor in community, right? And bringing an understanding to the seniors on the street. And I just found that to be so inspiring to know that how many hours has gone into putting these kind of initiatives together and supporting older adults, and not just older adults. You know, obviously this program, you know, in Act 3, by nature of our name, we sort of, our audience, you know, predominantly is supporting those in the way of older adults in community, but we support everyone in community. And we know that volunteerism in some aspects was down because of COVID, but we also know that in some areas it raised. Case in point is BC 211, where suddenly when we found out so many seniors were going to be isolated because of COVID, 1,000 people a day in the province were calling to volunteer their time and services, which was just, I've never been more astonished with numbers. It's 1,000 volunteers a day. In fact, we were only getting phone calls for maybe 200 or 300 seniors that were looking for service, but 1,000 people would come forward a day. Now those numbers have really changed since things have settled down. We're talking early March and April when things were very crazy. But still the need for volunteers is significant. And as we return to, let's just say, the transitional pieces of COVID-19, those numbers I think are probably going to go back on the rise of being able to support people with, you know, as you talked about earlier, maybe a bit of transportation or grocery shopping or modifying what community needs. Yeah. In your role, do you see a difference from community to community to community? Is it, you know, we live here on Vancouver and the Gulf Islands, but do you find that the numbers and the supports that are available for volunteers are indicative of the entire province? Are there pockets where more volunteers seem to come out than others, and not necessarily population based, but just where you see a lot more of it, or is it pretty much the same throughout?
I think what I've heard around the table from Volunteer BC and others across the province and even Canada is that it's all of those things that you've just said. Some are up, some are down, some haven't changed, some, you know, some, it's all over the place. And I don't think there's any one place that is the same as the next place. I think that it really, because organizations, volunteer centers, for an example, sadly, many of them are struggling. So just to stay open, so would not have the necessary supports to be able to engage the number of volunteers that they'd like to engage. And so that kind of information becomes less available. They're just struggling to stay open in whatever capacity. Yeah, so it's a problem.
Sorry to interrupt you, love. So sorry to interrupt you. I know that I am. My apologies, but you really flagged me with something there, because it's true. Prior to COVID-19, a number of volunteer agencies started to have some challenges, and many were closing their doors. Is there a rhyme or reason for that?
Yeah. So sadly, I've bared witness to a number of volunteer centers that have closed their doors on Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. Strangely enough, the volunteer center on Salt Spring closed. And that baffles, I don't even understand that. Yeah, so you've got a population of what, 20, 30,000 there, 20,000? Yeah, no volunteer center. So that, I had, it was a heartbreaking conversation with the executive director when they closed, and that's about 2 years ago. And it was due to lack of funding, certainly not because there wasn't a need or desire for volunteerism and volunteer opportunities. So that for me was quite troubling. And also a number of other volunteer centers up and down Vancouver Island that are still struggling and are closing their doors or minimizing what they're able to do. That's a problem. It's disturbing. And again, across Canada, it's the same thing. We just had this conversation again on a national level with Volunteer Canada. And again, the question was raised, who's going to be around in 2021 because of funding specifically. Core funding is not supplied for volunteer centers in Canada. In BC, we have the gaming grant, which does supply some funding. Again, that's a very competitive grant, as you know, and others may not know, but I'm just saying that's the reality of it. And, you know, the staff are kind and generous with their, yeah.
Yeah.
So I struggle with all of this, and so to get back to your original question about is one community similar to the next community, the answer is no. The needs of the communities are so unique, and while they're the same, they're different, but the same, but different, and so no real mechanism in terms of being able to track that.
So even though, and thank you for answering the question so eloquently, you really, I think, hit the home run on having some understanding of what's going on in the province, because I can see where it would be a yes and no and maybe so kind of situation. And I do want to go back to funding for a second, because, you know, I think that many people may not recognize that that there isn't secured funding for volunteer organizations from most, I mean, from almost all nonprofit agencies. We have to hunt for funding. That's the reality of it. And volunteer organizations are no different. But, you know, and there is no, as you said, there is no core funding. Has Canada or the province, you know, gone in looking for core funding from the government to help support it, with the government recognizing, as they do, the importance of volunteerism throughout the province and throughout the country?
That's an ongoing question.
Yeah.
And so you know, it's always our hope that while yes, the government does recognize the excellence in volunteerism and you know, appreciates it, they don't support it financially, and I understand that they do in a way with grants. Okay, I have to be a little bit more in my answer. I have to be a little more specific about that. So grants are available, yes, and most appreciated, absolutely. But no, there is no core funding, and so the thing is that you get what you get. So if you want organizations to be engaged, like volunteer centers, and run properly, then you need to hire staff. It cannot be all volunteer, because while people's hearts and desires are very much committed, they also have to make a living. And so if you want, you know, top notch, then you must invest some financial, you know, dollars behind that. Yeah. And then, yes, you can have the volunteers complementing, you know, volunteer centers and organizations. The unfortunate thing is that we don't have a freezer that you can walk back to and pull people out and thaw them. You know, it doesn't work that way. So
great metaphor.
Yeah, I just, you know, it's I can go on and on about it, but I would, you know, it would be such a blessing if there could be some actual dollars for each volunteer center. I'm not talking about the whole thing. I'm talking about, you know, some funding that would allow volunteer centers to do what they do and do it very well. Some volunteer centers are very fortunate, and then they've got good corporate funding, and that's hard work. And as you know, because you're involved as a volunteer in organizations, and you understand this, many people do. You have to have money to turn the lights on and pay the rent and staff time. Yeah. So those are the important details. And again, you can have a good complement of volunteers, but you have to have somebody steering the ship that understands how to manage those volunteers and do it well. Otherwise, people aren't going to stick around.
You know, and I'm really glad that you brought up that, because it's a perfect segue from a management perspective. You know, in my previous role as Better at Home coordinator at Nanaimo Family Life Association, it was a full-time job to manage the volunteers for the program and a full-time job in itself to manage the coordination of the contractors. And what people need to understand is volunteers, and I'll never forget, we had one guy who was with us for a long time, and he just gave his time away like nobody's business. I have to tell you, I was so blessed and honored to know him and to work with him. And I was devastated, I'll be honest with you. I'm not exaggerating. I was totally devastated when he left our organization. Volunteers don't have to stay. They just don't have to stay. They're there on their time, their dime. However, at times as managers, sometimes we need to fire volunteers. Now, that doesn't happen that often, but it's true that there is still that mutual relationship. So it is a management process. It's a people relationship building process. And in saying that, I also, the segue part of it is noting that not only was it a full-time job to be able to look after these volunteers, the needs were very different than those of contractors, right? The expectations of the volunteers were very different. The communications between them and client and participant and management was often very different. And it's a skill, it's a knack, and it's really important that because it's such a fine line, right? You want to engage people so much, but they need to feel appreciated. And speaking of Managers Appreciation Day recently, in the spirit of, understanding volunteerism, International Volunteer Management Appreciation Day was set aside. I'm not sure actually what the date was, but early in November, right?
Yeah, November 5th. But who keeps track?
But who keeps track? November 5th, who cares about stuff like that? That seems a little anti what we've been talking about. But the management is one thing. I think people really do their best efforts to appreciate volunteers when they come to support whatever the organization is. And there's never anything that we can do too much for our volunteers. Have you found that the needs of volunteers, certainly in recognizing Managers Appreciation, I'm sure there was a lot of educational workshops and things that were out there for managers who were working with volunteers. Have you seen any trends change in the way of volunteer management over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. So because I've been and I'm going to just flip it around. Instead of calling myself a volunteer manager, I'm going to say manager of volunteers.
Yes.
As a resource, and that's a bit of a flip there, because I have about 30 years of managing volunteers, and certainly in a paid capacity about 25, and then I am a volunteer manager of volunteers in some other situation. So there we go. And so what I will say is that folks will say, you get paid for that? Like, as of when I was in a paid
position. For sure.
Yeah, do you get paid for that? And hence the flip of the name. The one organization that I worked for, it was a heritage site in Alberta, and I managed 1,200 volunteers. I'd say that's a full-time job and definitely an HR position. However, many times we don't get no respect in terms of that, exactly the way you have framed it. It is a skill. It's there's training in the background there. It's very important to always practice best practice in all areas of volunteer management. I'm just going to convey a little story to you about, you had mentioned, if I can, firing a volunteer.
Please. I love him. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that. So I had to let my father go as a volunteer. And that was not the easiest thing to do. He had been a solid volunteer for about 20 years at this historic site, and well respected. However, he was not able to continue in the role that he was in. So what I did was I actually buddied him up with someone else and provided a different role, more one of engaging the public, if you will, and he was satisfied with that. So he didn't get he wasn't ousted by any stretch of the imagination. And we had a big party and all of these kinds of things, and well recognized. So that was interesting. That was, I didn't have the support of my manager at the time. He wondered why I had to do this, which of course, I was not going to divulge, because there's privacy, and you have to keep everything in the vault, and that's the way it was. But my dad was okay with it, and not at first. He was pretty angry with me, and then things cooled, and it was fine, and he continued on in a different role.
Yeah.
And I had to do that a couple of times over the years, and because sometimes there was no fit. It wasn't a fit for the fair exchange, was not going on. It wasn't good for the volunteer, and it wasn't good for the organization. It wasn't good for the client, being the general public. So that was another piece that I had to deal with. These things are skills that you have to have a good skill set, and lessons learned. Many of my colleagues were great resources and still continue to be great resources. So I think it's not just, I'm going to manage volunteers. Just decided I'm going to do that. Yeah. No, it doesn't work that way.
I'm so glad that you said that, because you're absolutely right. It is not, for the faint of heart. It is a respect, and should be a respected position. One of my colleagues, I can't even tell you how much I learned from her. She is an absolutely extraordinary role model when it comes to being in volunteer engagement. Mia, if you're listening to this program, I'm directly referring to you. Because I mean, it's true. It's an incredible gift for people to be able to work on the front lines with people. But having to tell your dad, dude, this isn't working. We have to shift your role, and obviously delicately finding the right method of facilitating that, so that you're not, hurting anyone or stepping on toes or, anything like that. But to be your dad, that couldn't have been easy. My goodness.
Well, you know what, it wasn't, but I'm just going to digress a little bit. One of the things that I found when I actually flipped from one government position to this position of management of volunteers, and I did that for 8 years, but when I entered that position, there was no policy and procedure, nothing.
Yeah.
That volunteer program had been running for about 20 years. In unison with, so it was government employees working alongside, and I'll get to the chase here right away, but you'll see where I'm going with this. So there was the Friends Society that had a volunteer program, and then the government side had a volunteer program, and they would be working side by side and being treated completely differently. From one end to the other, and so I just what I found was that I had to develop a policy and procedure around what would work the best to engage all of these 1,200 volunteers, and engage fair and equal treatment for both sides, because as I said, they'd be working side by side, and one would be treated this way and one would be treated that way, and that just didn't work. So I was asked to develop policy and procedure for this volunteer program, and part of it was about termination. I developed policy and procedure around termination, and so it really became about it is HR, and how to approach this in the best way, and so I found that with the aid of this policy and procedure that I was able to develop, with the help of my many voices of experience across the province and the country, because I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. It ain't rocket science. People out there have already done it. So, and they have the experience dealing with all of these things. So that was really helpful in dealing with these situations where I did have to let a volunteer go, whether I was engaging them or having to fire them, as you say. you've got the paperwork, you've got the backup, you've got all of the voice of experience in the background there as an aid. So those are the things that come around best practice. And I've gone on a tangent here, but
No, it's
it's really about, yeah. So it's about the profession, and we have an organization, volunteer management professionals in Canada, and so some folks choose to go that route. Other folks take what other kind of certification or training or learn from their peers. I took a course at Grant MacEwan in Edmonton, volunteer sector management and certification, and that was one of the best decisions I ever made. I'm still friends with my classmates, and it's been an incredible bonus to have that, as well as the instructors from the course. And although the course no longer exists, which is unfortunate, but we're still in contact, and they haven't forgotten what they knew or know. And so it's great to be able to refer back to individuals that I know that are current, even retired, to help, answer questions that are posed to me or something that I might have to deal with. So again, just best practice in all areas of volunteer management.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I don't know that people really understand that there are certifications that are available for volunteer management. Through the university we have here, our VIU has volunteer management programming, as does SFU and UBC. There's a number of different programs that are available as weekenders to sort of augment what you may already know. And certainly it's worth looking them up online to find more information about volunteer management certification. Now, I just am curious, because we are running out of time. I can't believe that our hour is almost up already. But before we go into our turnaround, our life lesson piece, I just wonder, from a Volunteer BC perspective, what kind of supports that you may offer the community? Are there such, if people want to reach out to you, Anne-Marie, what does that look like in the way of offering supports for community in the province?
Absolutely. So we can be your go-to. Just go to our Volunteer BC. It's a simple website, and you're going to see that there's lots of free offerings, resources, material. We've developed a number of handbooks that are easy reads and accessible, like I Want to Volunteer, or how do you start a volunteer center, how do you start a volunteer program, what are volunteer opportunities are available, where do I go. We're linked to the 211, we're linked to all kinds of resources that are available. Our manager is more than happy to discuss anything with you. If you want to volunteer, you don't know where to start, you don't know where to go, you don't know how you're going to do that. Again, we're a provincial organization, so we have we represent all the volunteer centers across the province. So, we're connected. Rita, by the way, is now on our board.
Oh, that's great.
Say that to you. Yes, Rita from Volunteer.
Well, in all transparency, I'm actually now on Rita's board as well.
I love it. See how we're connected? This is great. We continue to be connected.
We're going to remain connected for sure.
Yeah.
So in all fairness, Volunteer Nanaimo is now part of my world, and I'm really, really glad that she's part of the bigger provincial picture, because I think that we're in the right direction, most definitely. All right, my darling, here's where we get to the nitty gritty of the good stuff as we roll along in the ending of our, hey, listen, if you have just tuned in, I'm sorry that you're tuning into near the end of the program. You have turned into Act 3 on CHLY 101.7 FM. I'm Kathy Holmes. I'm glad to be your host. And in the Zoom booth with me today is Marie Koeppen, and she is with Volunteer BC. And we're now talking about the life lesson and the connections. Normally, I tell people in the middle of the show to please go get a pen and paper. So I'll make sure that Anne-Marie is able to repeat that information for you as we close the program. So tell me, darling, what are your thoughts about the life lesson? What would you, if you could, imbibe on our province, in our cities, in our communities, on Vancouver and the Gulf Islands? What does that look like to you?
Well, I think I'm going to tell you a story.
Yay, I love stories.
And it really encompasses the spirit of volunteerism, and that it's alive and well. And if I can't quite get through it without shedding a tear, you'll understand why. I'm starting to tear up as I'm even thinking about telling you the story. So many years ago, my husband and I, we farmed in Alberta, East Central Alberta. We homesteaded, and you know, we got through 30 years of that, and it was wonderful, and made many dear acquaintances and supports in our community. And rural communities are the same as urban communities, but you know, different, but the same, but different. And one thing that we have to do when we're in a very rural area, which we were, is we rely on each other for many different, you know, in many different ways, shapes, and forms. And so that undocumented volunteerism occurs. So one morning, many years ago, we had a fire. We had a sorry, we had a barn fire, and I'm happy to report that not much loss of livestock. We were able to save, you know, most, which was a saving grace. But got a knock on the door early morning, and it was our neighbor, and so he says, okay, he says, I want you to be calm, but your barn has burnt to the ground, and I didn't come and get you any sooner because I know what you would have done. And I would have run into the barn while it was ablaze, because that's just what I would have done. Anyway, we went there, and there it was, burnt to the ground. Fortunately, as I said, not too much loss of livestock, which was the main thing. Anyway, we didn't know what we were going to do because we didn't have any insurance. We were broke. And so we didn't know what to do. And so we were in church on Sunday morning, and one of the elders got up and he said, yep, on Saturday morning, you're going to go to Koeppen's, and we're going to do a barn raising. And so I didn't know what that would look like. I thought, oh, what do we do? So my husband went and he got materials, and we didn't know who was coming or what was happening or whatever. And on Saturday morning, did you ever see that movie Field of Dreams?
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
That's what it looked like.
Wow.
I can't even begin to tell you what that week I was a cooking fool. Like I didn't know who I was cooking for. I didn't know amounts. I didn't know what I was making or baking or doing. But not only did the people come, but they also bought they brought food, and like they just kept coming and coming and coming. And it was amazing. And in that day, there was people that I knew, but there was also people that I didn't know, and people that I might have known. It was friends of friends of friends of friends. And at the end of the day, we stood there and we gazed on this hip roof barn that had been put up by the generosity of the volunteer spirit. And I've just never forgotten that. And that was, you know, that's like, well, it's a long time ago. It's almost, well, 40 years ago. And the barn still stands today. But that I can't even begin to tell you the emotion. And you know, they just like they came and free will, and there we are. So that for me speaks volumes about a personal experience that I had around volunteerism, and I have a hard time getting through that story even today.
Well, I can feel it through this Zoom. I'm sure our listeners can feel it in their cars as they're driving. Probably a few have pulled over and are just processing the emotion that goes with it. You know, because you hear about stuff like that happening, but to know somebody who's actually experienced it is phenomenal. You're right. It's Field of Dreams. I just, you know, I just think that that's so inspiring, and it's a good reason why you're at the helm of where you are. I'm sure that's partially the driving force. It keeps pushing you forward is stories like your own and many others I'm sure you've witnessed over these years. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show today. I'm so emotional myself right now, and so grateful that you shared that beautiful, beautiful story and your wisdom about volunteerism. Can you, for those people that were stabilized and did grab that piece of paper and a pen, could you please offer up some information on how people could reach you and Volunteer BC?
Sure. So you can just go to our website. All of the board members are, that you can certainly get a hold of us through our manager, Laura Lynn, and she'll put you in contact with us individually. No problem with that. And I'm always happy to chat with anyone or email with anyone if they have some concerns or ideas or thoughts around on volunteerism. No problem at all. Yeah, we're totally available.
That's fantastic. Well, I've certainly enjoyed meeting with you over these many years and learning more about being a better volunteer coordinator and supporting volunteerism throughout the province. Thank you so much for your time. You have been listening to Act 3 on CHLY 101.7 FM, and Marie Koeppen from Volunteer BC has been our guest. Been just such a privilege. Thank you so much once again, Anne-Marie, for being on the show today. Please tune in next week, folks, every Monday at 1 o'clock. And by the way, subscribe to our YouTube station. We know that you want to listen to these programs again. You might have found something that you're just so interested in. You got to go back and get some more information on. Check the website on YouTube and make sure that you subscribe. And of course, Act 3 television is still on its way. So stay tuned for more information upcoming. We'll see you next week on Act 3. Thanks again for tuning in, and have yourself an absolutely marvelous day.